Hello and welcome back, my incredible AP Insight family. Abby Phillip here. Let's start with a number 5,000. That's the figure now circulating in closed military briefing rooms. 5,000 Iranian ballistic missiles, potentially operational by the end of 2027. Not a prediction from a think tank, not a speculative estimate from an opposition politician. It comes directly from Israeli Defense Forces intelligence sources, people inside the system who have access to what Tehran is building, how fast it's building it, and where those weapons are going. The question being asked at the highest levels of the Israeli and American defense establishment right now is a simple one. Can any missile defense network on Earth really stop 5,000 ballistic missiles from reaching their target? Because if the answer is no, and there are serious military professionals who believe the answer is no, then the strategic picture in the Middle East is not only deteriorating, it is approaching a threshold that many senior Israeli officials are now describing in their own words as the point of no return. This is not background noise. This is not a diplomatic position. What we are seeing, based on reporting from outside Israel in mid-February, directly citing IDF sources, is a formal intelligence assessment being made privately to American commanders. Israel is telling its closest military ally that a direct military confrontation with Iran is not a manageable and delayed scenario. It is effectively inevitable, according to these officials, given the current trajectory of Tehran's weapons program. These are serious words. Think about it. Senior defense officials from one of the world's most capable military powers sitting down in front of their American counterparts and saying, "We believe war is coming, and we are not sure we are ready for what Iran could throw at us now." So let's look at what the intelligence says, what it means in practice, and why it matters to every decision made in Jerusalem, Washington, and beyond, the production line that doesn't stop. Israeli intelligence is tracking this. Iran is currently producing about 100 ballistic missiles per month. That's a baseline figure, 100 missiles, 30 days, continuous production, and the estimate is that this number is not static. It is expected to increase. Intelligence officials expect monthly production to increase over time as Iran continues to invest in its manufacturing infrastructure, its supply chains, and its technical workforce. Do the math and the momentum becomes clear. At 100 missiles per month, Tehran is adding 1,200 to its arsenal each year. Maintain that pace through 2025, 2026, and 2027, and you're looking at a stockpile that could surpass 5,000 before the end of the year. These are not wild guesses. These estimates are based on intelligence about specific facilities, known production rates, logistics movements, and assessments of Iran's industrial capacity. And the strategy behind all this production is not subtle. It doesn't take sophisticated analysis to decode it. Iran is not building 5,000 missiles because it is confident that each one will evade Israeli and American defenses through some technological breakthrough. Tehran's approach is rooted in volume. The calculation is straightforward and, from the perspective of purely military logic, coldly rational. Build so many missiles that even a layered, well-funded, technologically advanced missile defense system cannot stop everything. Except that many will be shot down. Count on getting through far enough to cause damage and disruption that achieves strategic objectives. This is a numbers game, and Iran is playing it deliberately and patiently. What is Israel telling Washington privately? The briefings Israeli officials have been holding with their American counterparts in recent weeks are not routine intelligence exchanges. They represent something more deliberate, a systematic effort by Jerusalem to ensure that Washington fully understands the scale and pace of what is happening inside Iran's military-industrial complex before making decisions about diplomacy, sanctions, military posture, or direct action. In these closed-door meetings, according to sources familiar with the discussions, Israeli officials offered an assessment that went beyond acknowledging the threat. They told American commanders directly that Israel's own defense infrastructure, even with its multiple layers of systems, even with the addition of American-operated platforms, is not designed to fully absorb a large, sustained Iranian missile barrage. Let it sink in. Israel is not pleading weakness to gain political leverage. Israel operates what is widely considered the most sophisticated integrated air and missile defense network of any country of its size. And yet, the people who run that network are telling their allies, we have a gap problem, and that gap is getting wider every month as Iran's production lines keep rolling. What does that network actually look like? There are multiple layers to Israel's defense architecture. At the highest altitude, intercepting ballistic missiles in the terminal phase of flight, sits the Arrow 3 system, specifically designed to engage long-range ballistic threats outside the atmosphere. Below that, David's sling handles medium to long-range threats, the kind that saturate the mid-range layer of any defense system. Iron Dome, the most publicly recognized of the three, operates at low altitudes against short-range rockets and projectiles. Complementing all of this, the United States has deployed THEAD, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, as well as Patriot missile batteries, both of which add additional interception capability in multiple altitude bands. It's a formidable array. It represents billions of dollars in development, decades of operational refinement, and the integration of real-time radar data, intercept algorithms, and coordinated launch decisions made in fractions of a second. And the people who built and operate it are sounding the alarm. The concern is not that the system fails under normal pressure. The concern is when the pressure is not normal, when the incoming threat is not dozens of missiles but hundreds, not a single attack, but successive waves over days or weeks, not a manageable tactical challenge but a sustained strategic barrage specifically designed to exhaust the interceptor arsenal and overwhelm the decision-making speed of the defense system. IDF sources have made it clear that even this layered structure does not offer what they describe as a completely hermetic solution. Hermetic in military parlance means airtight. And it is not airtight, not to the extent that Iran could eventually deploy. Shadow of 8,000. There is a number in this story that is bigger and more disturbing than 5,000. Before Israel launched Operation Rising Sun, which changed the trajectory of Iran's missile program with those strikes, assessments indicated that Tehran had within range of 8,000 ballistic missiles by about 2030. 8,000. That's the scale of the problem that Israel was facing before it changed its calculus with military action. The strikes under Operation Rising Line were specifically intended to change that trajectory, to damage production facilities, disrupt supply chains, degrade the manufacturing base that was generating the buildup. And according to Israeli accounts, those attacks had a real impact. Launchers were destroyed, stockpiles were depleted, the timeline was pushed back. But here's the point that the current intelligence assessment is making with uncomfortable clarity. Iran has recovered. The setback was real, but it wasn't permanent. And that fact brings us directly to the events of June 2025, 12-day war. What really happened? What became known as the 12-day war in June 2025 was no skirmish. It was not a brief exchange of gunfire in which both sides acted selfishly and then retreated. It was a sustained, large-scale military conflict, and the data emerging from it tells a story that defense analysts are still processing. During those 12 days, Iran fired more than 500 ballistic missiles at Israeli soil, 500 ballistic missiles in less than 2 weeks. Along with this missile campaign, Tehran launched nearly 1,000 drones, a figure that would have represented a major military operation on its own. Taken together, the combined barrage created what military planners call a multi-domain saturation attack. Different weapon types, different flight profiles, different speeds and altitudes, all designed to simultaneously stress every component of the Israeli defense system. Israel's layered network performed. According to Israeli assessments, approximately 86% of incoming Iranian ballistic missiles were intercepted. This is a significant achievement by any historical standard. Air defense systems rarely achieve interception rates that high against the most sophisticated ballistic threats under sustained attack conditions. The technical performance of Arrow, David's sling, Iron Dome, THEAD, and Patriot working in concert represents a true operational success, but 14% passed, and this 14% is very important. When these missiles were not intercepted, they reached Israeli population centers, and the damage was severe. Cities suffered the consequences. Tel Aviv was attacked, Ramat Gan was damaged, Bet Yam was hit, Haifa in the north of Israel was hit, Beersheba in the south was also struck, residential areas, infrastructure, urban neighborhoods, missiles that penetrate the defensive screen cause the kind of civilian devastation that leaves visible scars on a country and creates political pressure that does not quickly subside. Now ask yourself, if 86% of the interventions caused this level of damage in Tel Aviv and Haifa and Beersheba, what would happen if Iran had 5,000 missiles and launched a barrage 10 times larger? So what does the math look like? This is the calculation that Israel is presenting to Washington. Before and after weapons. To understand where Iran stands today, you have to understand where it started and how quickly it has rebuilt. Before the June 2025 conflict, Israeli assessments had put Iran's total ballistic missile inventory at between 2,500 and 3,000. This was the stockpile that Tehran had built up through years of investment in its missile program, a program that had been a strategic priority for the Islamic Republic for decades, unaffected by fluctuations in oil revenues, sanctions pressure, and international diplomatic demands. The June battle and the operations that preceded and followed it inflicted real damage on this stockpile and the systems used to fire these weapons. Estimates indicate that up to half of Iran's mobile missile launchers were destroyed during the conflict. The stockpile declined rapidly. Post-conflict assessments have placed Iran's remaining usable missiles at between 1,000 and 1,200, less than half of the number that entered Tehran. Only about 100 mobile launchers were estimated to be operational after the fighting ended. From a purely military perspective, this was a significant reduction in Iranian attack capability. Losing half of your launcher fleet is no small setback. Cutting your available missile inventory by more than half creates real operational limitations on what you can threaten and how you can threaten it. But here is what the current intelligence assessment is documenting, and this is why it has raised alarm bells in Israeli defense circles that are now entering American briefing rooms. Iran has not been humiliated. Post-conflict intelligence indicates that Iran has since rebuilt the vast majority of its destroyed missile manufacturing infrastructure. Underground complexes that house manufacturing equipment, specifically designed to survive airstrikes that would wipe out surface facilities, have been repaired and restored. Solid fuel manufacturing plants that provide propellant for Iran's ballistic missile force have resumed operations, not at reduced capacity, not at a fraction of pre-war levels. According to Israeli assessments, production has resumed and in some areas has even increased above pre-conflict rates. It is the intelligence gathering that is sounding the current alarm bells. Iran retreated, Iran recovered, and now Iran is producing at a pace that, if sustained or increased, would push the threat to the kind of numbers that first signaled military action. The concept of irreversibility. Israeli officials are using a specific word in their internal assessments and in their conversations with their American counterparts. That word is irreversible. They are warning that the number of Iranian missiles could reach a threshold, a certain accumulation point, beyond which a military intervention becomes virtually impossible. Not too difficult, not too expensive, virtually impossible. What does this mean in practice? It means that counting a few missiles, the dispersion, hardening, concealment, and redundancy of Iran's arsenal reach a point where even a comprehensive preemptive strike cannot destroy it enough to change the strategic equation. At this threshold, Iran retains a deterrent strike capability, regardless of what anyone does to undermine it. From Tehran's perspective, the deterrent logic becomes permanent. Israeli defense planners are drawing a line, not a public red line declared in a speech, but an operational assessment of the window of time in which military action against Iran's missile infrastructure could still yield strategically meaningful results. According to the same reporting that revealed this intelligence in mid-February, officials in Jerusalem believe that the window cannot remain open indefinitely. This framework shapes everything Israel is doing in the present day. It explains the urgent need for briefings to Washington. It explains why top defense officials are now effectively declaring confrontation inevitable rather than managing it through diplomacy and deterrence. And it provides the strategic logic behind the options Israel is said to be exploring. Israel is considering what to do about it. The reported options under Israeli consideration are not academically hypothetical. They are operational planning discussions within a defense establishment that has demonstrated both the determination and capability to launch long-range strikes on Iranian installations. The first type of option involves preemptive or follow-on strikes that specifically target Iran's missile production facilities. The goal here is not to destroy every missile Iran has, a task that would be difficult given its operational fragmentation and rigidity, but rather to attack the infrastructure that is producing new missiles. Hit the factory and you have stopped the production line. Destroy the manufacturing equipment and production of 100 missiles per month would be reduced or stopped altogether. This logic targets capacity rather than inventory, and from a strategic cost-benefit perspective, it addresses the root of the problem rather than its downstream consequences. The second type of reported target includes launch platforms, the mobile launchers and fixed launch infrastructure that actually launch missiles into the air, as well as missile storage depots where ready-made weapons are stored before deployment. Destroying launchers limits what Iran can fire, regardless of how many missiles it has built, and hitting storage sites reduces the ready stockpile that could be used in a rapid, large-scale barrage. Both categories of targeting involve operations against hard-to-reach and hidden installations inside Iranian territory in an environment where Iran has invested heavily in its air defenses. These are not easy missions. They will require the kind of long-range strike capability and intelligence access that Israel has built and refined over years of preparation specifically for this emergency. But here is the element of the current situation that is generating the most attention in Washington. Israeli sources have clearly stated that if the threat to Jerusalem has reached a level that calls for action, attacks on Iranian missile infrastructure could go ahead whether or not the United States provides full coordination and verification. This is an important statement. Israel is not threatening to act against American wishes. The relationship between the two countries' defense establishments is too deep and too important for this framing to be accurate. What Israel is communicating is something more precise and more important, that the timeline driving Israeli decision-making may not align with Washington's diplomatic calendar, that if the window for effective military action is closing, Israel will not let that window close simply because the consultation process has not been completed. This puts American planners in a position where passive observation is not a viable option. If Israel acts, the United States is involved, whether it chooses to. American forces in the region operate within Iranian missile range. American allies are affected. American strategic interests throughout the Middle East are immediately affected by any escalation between Iran and Israel. Why is this moment different? Intelligence assessments about the Iranian missile program are nothing new. Warnings about Tehran's buildup of ballistic missile weapons have been circulating in the defense and intelligence communities for years. What is different about the current moment? What has changed in the intelligence picture that is driving the specific alarms expressed in these IDF briefings is the convergence of multiple factors that would be individually relevant and together represent a new state of affairs. First, there is the practical reality of June 2025. Before the 12-day war, assessments of what Iran could do with its missile power were theoretical. After June 2025, they are empirical. The world watched Iran launch over 500 ballistic missiles at a country that has the most capable missile defense system ever deployed in a war situation. 86% interception rate, cities damaged, infrastructure damaged. Civilian populations in multiple urban centers are facing the effects of ballistic missiles that penetrate air defenses. This is no longer a scenario in a planning document. This is a documented operational event. It tells you what Iran is willing to do, what it is capable of doing with its current missile inventories, and, critically, what the damage profile looks like when even a small fraction of a large barrage gets through. Multiplying these parameters by the missile count Iran has produces results that are genuinely alarming to anyone who honestly runs the numbers. Second, there is the speed of recovery. The fact that Iran has rebuilt its damaged production facilities to the point where monthly production has reached about 100 missiles and is expected to increase tells decision makers something important about the resilience of Iran's missile industrial base. The strikes set it back. They didn't break it. The underground infrastructure, the dispersal of facilities, the redundancy built into the system, all of these allowed Iran to absorb the damage and restart production in a time frame that did not lend strategic stability to the decline. If attacks temporarily push Iran back and Iran rebuilds within months, then the question becomes more complicated about what repeated attacks can achieve. Temporary disruptions have temporary effects. Permanent disruptions, the kind that would actually change the trajectory of Iran's missile development, require either destroying infrastructure Iran cannot rebuild or maintaining a campaign of attacks that keeps pace with the rebuilding. Neither of these options is easy, nor can they be done without significant strategic consequences. Third, the pace of production itself. 100 missiles per month is the current baseline. The projection is that this baseline will increase. Iran is investing in people, equipment, raw materials, and the industrial capacity to produce more. If this pace is maintained, the figure of 5,000 missiles by the end of 2027 is not a worst-case estimate. It is the central case. The worst case is much longer. These three factors combined, documented operational reality, demonstrated speed of recovery, and a path to rapid production, create a different kind of intelligence picture than before June 2025. And that's why Israeli officials are now using these briefings, the language they're using, and floating options that include operating without full U.S. coordination, the defensive gap, and what fills it. Back to the fundamental issue at the heart of this assessment, even the combined weight of Arrow 3, David's Sling, Iron Dome, THAAD, and Patriot is not described by those who operate it as capable of providing air defense against a sustained, large-scale Iranian missile campaign. Understanding why a saturation scenario requires understanding the basic mathematics of missile defense. Each interceptor missile costs money, requires manufacturing time, and represents a finite resource. Each interception decision requires radar tracking, computer processing, and human authorization to deal with multiple threats simultaneously. Defense systems are designed to handle a certain throughput, a certain number of simultaneous threats, before the system's processing, tracking, and engagement capacity begins to saturate. Iran's strategy takes direct advantage of this math. By combining ballistic missiles with drones, Tehran forces defenses to engage multiple threat categories simultaneously, each with different flight profiles, radar signatures, and interception requirements. Iron Dome handles drones but is not designed for high-altitude ballistic interception. Arrow deals with high-altitude ballistic threats but is not the right system for low, slow drones. The systems must work together, sharing data and distributing responsibilities in real time, and doing all of this while simultaneously defending against more than 500 ballistic missiles and 1,000 drones, as was the case in June 2025, pushing the entire architecture to its operational limits. At 5,000 missiles, the saturation problem becomes more acute in terms of capability. The volume is not just large, it enables attack strategies that are not available to smaller weapons. Simultaneous multi-front barrage, sequential attacks to deplete the interceptor stockpile before launching a primary strike. Decoy deployments are intended to divert interference from the highest priority missiles. All of these tactical options become available to a military force with a sufficiently large missile inventory. This is the environment that Israeli defense planners are working against. And it is the environment they are describing to American commanders when they say that the current defense architecture does not provide a hermetic solution.